Hello, welcome to the Book and Pastor Podcast, a podcast about reading. My name's Tyler Horton.
And I'm Scott Kohler. Well, episode 1 generated 8 subscribers, I noticed, on YouTube. So we want to thank everybody who chose to do that. On this episode, we're going to be talking about reading plans. We're already over a month into 2026, but I expect that most of us that spend a lot of time reading are constantly making or adjusting our plans. So I'm going to assume that it's not really too late for a conversation like this. So we will talk about our own reading plans for 2026, but we're also just going to talk about our approaches to planning our own reading and also maybe touch a little bit on how we follow through on those plans. So I thought if we could just start by talking about the types of reading that each of us do, because I think that's probably the starting point for me, at least, making plans, is to be like, what are the different types of reading that I do? So, and then I try to figure out where they're all going to land, what direction they're going to go. So I wondered, Tyler, what kinds of reading do you do, and what guides your choices, and then how does that look for this year?
Yeah, so raising it this way, I've realized that two things. The categories are an essential part. That I have a few very distinct categories of reading, and that I have rules, or we could call them like paths of discipline, which I follow in each of those categories. And so, one of the things I recognize about my own reading is I only have one book in each category at a time, no matter what. And I always finish the book I'm on before starting a new one. And sometimes, I think this even came up last week, sometimes I basically cheat. And like, I've read 100 pages in 20 minutes because I'm like, this is garbage. I'm just getting through this.
Right.
So again, how I organize my reading is definitely that I have categories, different types of reading that fit my life in different ways. But for me, it's like absolutely only one book in each category at a time, and always finish the book. So immediately, I think that's different from you, isn't it?
Yeah, I've been pretty close to that myself this year too. I don't know that I've always been that way. So for me, the I would say I'm always only reading one novel or work of fiction at a time. Like I never multitask on those. But the lines between some of the other categories that I have definitely get blurry. And so, and also the means of reading. So I don't read on Kindle or audiobook very often, but there are times when it's convenient, especially if I'm saying I want to catch up with some reading time because I haven't been able to find space in the day, but I do need to go for a walk. Then maybe the audiobook will overlap with one of the other categories and it won't be so strict. But otherwise, I would say that I'm also doing one at a time.
Yeah. All right. Fine.
Yeah.
Also, when you say this year, could also just say like in the last 35 days.
Right.
Which, anyway, my categories are the big one is leisure reading, which in many ways is the thing we're going to end up talking about here most of all. And so that's like obviously just what I do in my leisure time. And also reading is what I do for leisure. Like I do like go for walks and there's some other bits and pieces, but my default of like, oh, I'm done work. What's the thing I now do is I read for leisure. So that's the biggest category, and that is almost exclusively novels. It's pretty rare that I'll sneak something else in or do something else in there, but every now and then I do that. The other big category I generally have going now is work reading.
Right.
So there's often a book I need to read that has something to do with like a talk I need to give, or sometimes it's like a book review I need to write. And so then I have work reading, and that falls in like a distinct section of the day, which is late afternoon or sometimes mid afternoon, Monday to Friday. But I won't do work reading on evenings, and I won't do it on weekends. And
Okay.
so those right now are the only two categories that are consistently active. There are other categories of stuff that I've done more like historically but not right now. So one of them is devotional reading. Um,
Hmm.
and that was, again, I focused mostly on the Puritans.
Right.
And I can't remember where I found it, but someone said it was probably like Martin Lloyd-Jones, that use the Puritans as a spiritual choke to sort of start warming your heart before the Bible. And so I read
Right.
a lot of Puritans for a few years, but dropped that for a number of reasons. One of which was just to feel like I could be a bit more focused on Bible reading. So I didn't say that, but Bible reading is also, I guess, the third category that's happening first thing in the morning. So, but devotional reading has really dropped out. So has, I used to read out loud to the kids, and I mean, one of them has moved out, so that's over. And then the next one sort of phased out of wanting to do it, and the third one, we're like halfway through a long 3-book series, and it's, I think, probably been 8 months since we picked it up, so that might be done.
Right.
So actually, no, there is one more category that I
Okay.
have going, and this is sort of new, which is poetry. I
Right.
try to always have a book of poetry on the go, but I'll have the book that's in that category will be with me for like 4 or 5 months.
Sure.
And if like an opportunity comes up, like I'm going away for a week, then that's often the reading I'll take to do. So again, big categories: Bible, leisure, work, poetry. That's where I'm at. Where are you at,
Okay.
man?
So the categories for me broadly would be there's definitely fiction is always happening, theology or biblical studies, or the combination of them, like a theological interpretation thing is going on. Um, and then I guess history and biography are two other categories that I feel like I'm looking to raise those up. I always find biography to be first of all an inspiring genre of book for sure, because you're getting to see the way a life works out as a whole, and in a big sort of high level look at it, but also getting attention to the details that kind of affect how you think about your own life. So it kind of ends up being personal motivational reading. But I also find that biography takes you into whatever time period that person lived in. And the other benefit of it, why every year I'm kind of like I should read more biographies, is that they go easily. Like
Hmm.
you can read biography before going to bed and just absorb it and but not be like, you know, wound up in it or really intense like you might be if it was a different kind of reading. So biography and history, and then the last one, I guess for me would be general. I would call it general nonfiction, but that kind of catches a lot of stuff. It catches things to do with kind of the world that we live in now. So occasionally I'm reading things like that um, that are almost cultural commentating and stuff. But this would also fit um, philosophical type of books. Not that I read heavy philosophy of any kind, but there are some big books that I, have been pointed to as significant for understanding the way that we look at the world or whatever. And so I'll end up with either those on my list and don't get to them. So Charles Taylor's Secular Age would be one that has many times been put on the list. I think it's behind me right now. I'm not going
Have
to
you ever
turn around.
started it?
Oh yeah, I've read 100 pages of it, or maybe 200. So
How many times have you started it?
I've started it twice for sure. And
Okay.
maybe a third because of an audiobook. I have it as an audiobook as well. So this is confession time.
Yeah.
But this is something we'll get to later. So yeah, I'm looking at the different categories also, and just trying to say like, okay, what's a reasonable amount of pace of fiction reading for me? Is part of it is saying, okay,
Hmm.
if I can give myself 20 pages in whatever novel or short story collection I'm reading a day, then that probably works out to being like 20 or 25 of that type of book during the course of the year without it being an all-consuming thing. Because I can sometimes, feel like, oh, I gotta read another one or something, and I'm trying to just look and say, I'd like to fiction is important to me. I think I learn a lot about the way the world is, but I also know I need space for very many different kinds of reading, both personally and in terms of work. So yeah.
So it hasn't struck me before we've done this exact conversation that you and I think about our categories very differently. Where mine are essentially
Right.
like functional, yours are
Right.
genre. And so
Kind of, yeah.
the nice thing about yours is that you're getting a really broad sweep of stuff all the time.
Right.
Whereas like I well, I mean I don't. I mean I could. I would just have to use my leisure reading time
Right.
for some of that other stuff, which I do sometimes. So and part of
I know that your leisure reading is a broader category than you maybe led us to think from what you said. It's not always only fiction, but
but like recently it really is
yeah.
almost exclusively.
Okay.
But so then um, I'm also recognizing that this is quite different. What I do now is quite different than what I've done in years past,
Hmm.
and I also hadn't recognized that. And so it's interesting to see how the shape of life shapes the reading that is like the reading time that's available and
Yeah.
the type of reading that happens. Because as I was finishing the PhD dissertation, like
Mm,
I couldn't read for leisure. It was just
right.
not going to happen. And so
Yeah.
then I just got into audiobooks. And I remember through
Right.
the last stretch, I'd like come home. Well, it was long days. I'd come home late and then basically make something to eat, put on an audiobook, and then fall asleep. And
Right.
that was, yeah. And then I used to read as well a lot of biography. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, I wonder. I could shift things, but I like that. And the way you come at it, you end up with so much different material all at the same time. Do you do you find it difficult to get a grip on any of it by trying to keep a grip on all of it?
Some days, yes, I'm reading bits of like five different books, but most days I'm probably not. I'm probably
Hmm.
reading like three or four different ones, and they're so different from each other that they're not hard to keep track of, I
Okay.
would say. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
I'm at two currently, right? Like,
right.
and
Yeah.
honestly, mostly it's at one because
Mm.
like it depends what's going on in my life. Like a busy week will often push work reading out because work reading is something that like I use that category to sort of keep myself progressing, to keep
Right.
learning. Sometimes it's like of necessity I really need to read this, but I
Yeah.
really try to use that time to just sort of, expand. I was going to say professionally, but probably vocationally is
Yeah.
something I'm happier with.
Sure.
Yeah.
So here's a question. Here's the thing, I guess, where I find a problem with all these categories is in the aspirations. At the beginning of a year or when I'm making plans, with all these categories, it can be like, okay, I don't want to just pick one book for that category. I need to have a few or five or six. And then what ends up happening is that I've got a list of books that I want to read that I can never actually sustain in the course of a year. And then what happens at the end of the year is I look and I'm like, oh, I should make new plans. And so things from the past can get left. So, there are books like I have this scrap notebook here that is literally just pages that once were posted on my wall of reading goals and then the books as I read them. And it goes back to 2008.
Can you hold it
And
up like on like this so we can see how many pages are in that
it's
book?
it's not that thick. It's like 20, there's like well, it's 18 years worth of reading or 17 years worth of reading.
Man.
But the funny thing is the amount of things that were aspirations that have still not been fulfilled because went to another year, went to another list. So that's something I tried to do differently this year. Is I had these lists on my walls last year, which had a fiction list, and then it had the other categories on another one. And when the year ended, and I had read probably between a quarter and a third of them, I just thought I'm not making a new plan for the year other than what I just said, which is I'd like to up the intake of nonfiction
Hmm.
just for the balance of it. But otherwise, I left the lists on the wall and said, if those are the books I wanted to read last year and I haven't yet, I will try and keep on reading because it's embarrassing to look back And I mean, you might say that it's just to be expected of me, but I see in Reading Goals of 2009 that the book 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez was on that list. I read it in January, 17 years later. So, and there are others on this list as well that, they're kind of lifetime aspirations, but they're still on the shelf. So I
But
guess that
so,
brings me to another question is, do things derail you from your plans?
oh,
Do
sure,
you
but
ever find an immediate thing? Yeah.
I want to ask first, doesn't that mean it doesn't mean you're a bad reader? It means you're bad at making lists, which isn't nearly as big a problem, right?
It would be true. That would be true, except that 100 Years of Solitude is also a book that I had started and significantly gotten into. When I started reading it before Christmas, I noticed, almost halfway through the book when I passed the dog-eared page that marked the last time how far I got. So the goal for me this year is like finish books, Scott. Finish books.
Finish books, okay, yeah. So, because again, you come to every year with your categories and with a list in each category, and then, like I remember one year you were reading the sort of Harlem Renaissance stuff
Right.
and
Yeah.
things like that. Yeah. Where so and what was the question you just asked me that I
Yeah. Things
bulldozed?
that, like, I know that it happens to me where I've got plans, but then as the year goes on, or as even
Oh
just,
yeah.
it doesn't have to be yearly plans. This could be any kind of plans. You make plans, but you said last time, that you are able to finish projects better. Maybe you can, but I'm curious, do you get derailed by, oh, I heard about this new book? And I guess that brings a second question is how much do we let the appeal or the interest of that thing you just heard of that you should read end up displacing something that you've known you wanted to read and intended to for a long time?
Because of the way that I form my reading plans, it's almost impossible to categorize anything as getting derailed because I have so little plan. My like every year the thing like there's a few things I want to do in a year, but it's pretty sparse. So like the last number of years, I want to read Homer. I want to read the Iliad and the Odyssey every year. So
Yeah.
that's that. And then I've come into the last few years with like a reading project, but
Right.
like one. And so there was the Herman Bavinck, which was a monster project. But
Yeah.
then a couple years ago, or it was last year as well, I wanted to read Josephus, the full works of Josephus, right? Things like that. And I just have like a vague like I'm going to read Homer, and this year
Yeah.
maybe I should sort of read this or read the complete works of someone.
Yeah.
And other than that, I have no plan.
Okay.
And
So
so
what's this year's project?
I don't have one. Like honestly, I don't. So I'm like,
But in the work category, I feel like you've got a project on the go.
do I?
The the reading club. The
Oh sure, yeah yeah. Well,
Or
that
have you
fits
already
in.
read them
So
all?
the way I make plans is I don't think at the start of a year like what do I want to read this year.
Yeah.
I have found it really valuable to read in clusters, right? And so it's like, well, why read one novel by an author if you could read five, and then
Yeah. Yeah.
read a book about the author as well. And
Yeah.
so that's how I organize my reading. And so coming out of last year, the reference Scott's making is to a book club, which is based mostly on novels that relate to migration that I'm running online. And so then we're doing a book like every 2 months. So it gives
Okay.
me lots of time in between. And so the first book was Willa Cather, who I think you properly pronounce as Willa Cather.
Right.
Yeah, sorry.
I
Um,
don't know if it's a vocalized th, even though if it's cather like rather or cather like catheter.
yeah, these are things I never even consider. Um,
Sure.
so I read a bunch of her novels, and I
Hmm.
read two books about her. And so right now, actually, I pulled these over. The next book we're doing is, speaking of pronunciation, we're
Right.
about to read Abdulrazak Gurnah. And so I read one of these last year as a sort of like looking. So this is the one we're doing, Gravelheart. So
Yep.
then I went to the library and I was just like, well, why read one? I'm going to read Gravelheart again with the book club, but it was like, I'm just going to grab a stack of these and see what I can get through. And then I did
Right.
also pick up this, which, I mean,
Of
come on,
course.
who wouldn't want to read critical perspectives on Abdul Razak Gurnah?
Yeah.
And I doubt I will read this whole thing having brought it home and looked at it. And so that's, again, the thing is there. I just want to read in a cluster. And so
Right.
then when I feel done with it, I just move on. And like if I don't read all, I've signed out 6 novels. If I don't
Yeah.
read all 6, I'm just sort of like, meh. I read a
Yeah.
couple. The goal was to like read a cluster. I read a cluster.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, that seems like a good plan. Last year I did that with, in the fall, I did it with Penelope Fitzgerald, the British novelist from the late 20th century. I have all of her novels. I had found the last couple that I didn't own at a thrift store on a trip there in the fall. And so I was like, I should read these. So it meant rereading a couple that I had read, reading one that I hadn't. But then after three, they're not very long books. I had thought maybe I'll read all of them right now. And after three, I just thought, okay, that's good for now. I'll go back to them later because one of her books was on that list that was incompleted for this year. So I have a reason to get reminded to pick her books up later as well. And it was good, but you sometimes are like, okay, that's enough for now. I'm ready for a different voice.
Yeah. And I actually this year I do have another sort of cluster because I sometimes my categories do leak a little.
Uh-huh.
And so I read a missiology book, which is again technically a work thing. Um, and I've done that. Last year I read a book called Immigration and Conflict in Europe, which is
Right.
technically a workbook as well, but sometimes that works for leisure. And so, having read this other missiology book, I thought, well, maybe I should do a couple of more in sort of leisure reading time and see. But in many ways, I don't want to do that. So,
Right.
so your plan this year then is
Yeah.
to finish last year's plan?
Yeah, I would say that's that's the simple way to say it, but it's partly because last year's fiction plan included I basically pulled out and put on that list a section of world literature that are books that I've owned and not read for and wanted to. Like they're the kind of the big ones. And I put them there on that list knowing that I'd like to go grab one of those between some of the other more contemporary or Western or I guess written in English books. Um, and so I really enjoyed the time I spent with the Garcia Marquez book and then thought I'm going to pick up. So right now I'm nearly done Anton Chekhov's Selected Stories, about a
Hmm.
450-page selection of his short stories. But other books I stuck on that section of the list were again the sort of doorstop ones that I have not gotten around to, like one of Leo Tolstoy's books, another Dostoevsky book.
Just
But I kind
doorstop
of
books is great. I don't think I've heard doorstop books before.
yeah, yeah. I didn't come up with it, but yeah, it works for those big ones.
Yeah.
And then I have a couple that are I know just difficult or are going to take effort. Um, William Faulkner's Absalom is one that I have started in the past and just years and years ago and read a chunk of it, but in that case it was just it was taking enough energy and effort that I just moved into something that fit better. But I know it'll be rewarding when I get to it, so it's on the list for this year. Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian is another one,
Hmm.
much more dense book than The Road, and I've looked at it, maybe read the first chapter before, but those kind of books, I'm just like I'd like to. They've been on my. I actually had. I was trying to find for a while. I had a little yellow notepad piece of paper stuck to the back of my door in our last house, and I put it up there when I was about 38, I think, and it said books I want to read before I'm 40. And I know that I've only knocked about three more off that list since then in the last 10 years. And it was not a very long list. It was like
Okay.
the 10 or 15 books that I thought I feel like everyone refers to these. I'd like to actually read them. So a lot of this year's list from last year was those books that I thought it's time to finally just prioritize them and say whatever else attracts my attention right now probably can wait. But I
Have
still
you?
find it's hard to wait.
Yeah. Have you done? Because one of the sort of reading, like, I don't know if it's quite a cluster, but like emphases I've done is I've thought I want to reread stuff I've already read
Right.
and basically go back. Have you done that, or again,
Yeah.
like, is it these lists of like, get through stuff I've not yet read? How do you fit
Yeah.
those?
No, yeah, definitely. Like every year, there are some rereads, and
Every year.
I would say I'd have to look back and see, but sometimes it's been because back when we were reading aloud, or
Oh
maybe
yeah.
into a book club or something, there would be a reason to reread it. But yeah, I think I always want, like, thinking back to the Lewis quote that I mentioned last time about books that can bear rereading.
Hmm.
It kind of has made me think I always do want to have some things that I'm rereading. I don't want to just be saying I need to get more into me. I want to, like the Chekhov stories. I realized like I probably it would benefit me and I would appreciate the stories even more if I went back as soon as I'm done and just reread them. Um,
Yeah. See,
but
so
I can't do that.
sometimes when I think about my reading, I face this question, and like our time's essentially up. But
Yeah.
sometimes I think, wouldn't I be better off spending the rest of my life with books I've already read than reading anything new?
Hmm.
And I generally think no, not entirely,
There's a
uh,
case to be made for it.
but like especially sort of vocationally, like I need to,
Yeah.
go beyond. But on a literature level, I'm not sure that I'm better by reading new stuff.
No, I
And but
agree.
yeah, I don't know.
Let's talk about that sometime. I also want to like I just want to be pinning stuff for future talks. What we you mentioned books that you're reading and reviewing, and I just did a read and review yesterday. Um, it makes me ask the question about how we process the books when we're finished them. You and I've talked about this. Like, what process do we go through to make sure that the things that struck you are there to get back to, or to even just almost be like a mini second read? I'd love us to talk about that sometime. Um, but I don't know. Next time, are we maybe gonna let you talk about some Willa Cather? Yeah.
Maybe I'll be done my run at that point. Currently, I'm finishing one of ours,
Okay.
and then I have to finish. There's a book I'd started reading about her, and then there's one chapter about this book that I'm waiting to read until I finish the book.
Finish the book. Sure.
But that could happen in the next couple of days, so I'll definitely be done shortly.
Okay, and future also, I would like I'm going to be, I've read a series of books on Genesis, and I'm hoping to add a one or two novels related to Genesis as well, and hope to chat about that sometime in one of our next upcoming episodes too. So I know you love this when I there's always one person on these podcasts that says the like and subscribe thing, but I
But you
also
don't
want to
have to.
say, but if anybody has made it this far, I think comment section would be great to hear about how they do reading plans. So if you want to share that, feel free to share it. We would like to hear from you.
That's a useful thing. Thanks, Scott.